Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This is our 964 episode. Today we're going to discuss about urban sustainability challenge. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Mr. James, and Professor Dr. Nahir Majid. Thank you for joining today's sessions. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Smith.
Well, Dr. Sharif, thank you so much for letting me be part of today's session. And the topic really of urban sustainability and the challenges that are in place is a really important one. The fact that this is one of the United Nations goals even highlights it more in the global sector than even in each of our own communities where we have the challenges here. If I look back over the last probably 2 to 4 decades, demographic and economic changes have propelled really the cities and the urban centers to increase the inflow of becoming the principal habitat of a lot of humankind. And we see the population in rural environments falling, with the exception of a slight uh, uh, uptick during part of the pandemic. Uh, But cities are not only where rapid improvement in social, economic, environmental, and sustainability practices are possible, but it's indeed, if you really look at it from a 60,000 foot view, it is where most of the change is needed. And much of the cities in the world's emerging economies are increasingly drivers of prosperity, well, if we look globally, many of the resources are being depleted pretty heavily, and that's part of why you have this sustainable urbanization challenge going on there. Uh, and they are critical that all of these cities, all these regions, all these nations globally come together and begin to address this problem, because it's not just a problem in developed nations or developing nations. It crosses the board on those. And we have to find a way to achieve the economic and social uh, growth in a smart way without really costing more to the environment. And part of that lays in how the cities are planned, how they're governed, how they provide services to citizens. I can tell you that I think most of you know I live in Austin, Texas, and the city here has done something interesting now. Every new home built has to plant a minimum of 2 trees of a certain size. Everyone. Now, it is kind of weird going down neighborhoods where there are not trees before and seeing 2 trees in every yard, about the same size, growing up. And you kind of sit back and go, gee, I wonder what in 30 years this will look like, and how that's going to begin to affect some of the urban sustainability we're seeing there. Um, and But what we're really seeing there is that we have to begin to look at this in a more holistic way. Yes, we can uh, reduce our ecological footprint. We can improve some of the sustainability by planting trees and things like that. But we need to improve also the quality of life, and we need to look at from an economic development standpoint as well. Is how do we create the jobs, and how can the challenges be addressed in tandem with some of the critical issues in this area, such as energy, water consumption, and water production, biodiversity, disaster repair, climate change adaptation. And we're seeing a lot of these begin to come in place because the effect of urbanization and climate change are converging in really dangerous ways. You know, uh, Already, if you look globally, the almost 60% of the population is in urban centers already globally. And it's interesting because cities and towns really bear the brunt of most natural disasters, such as flooding, hurricanes, tropical storms, uh, and increasingly now, even wildfires. I can tell you again, here in my city right now, we have 4 wildfires going that are all above 300 acres, and they're all not contained and have been doing it. And it's part of the fact that we're so dry, and it's part of this. If I begin to look at some of the uh, forecasts we see uh, for weather, some of the evidence in case in the coming decade, a lot of these are going to take and increase the uh, frequency of extreme climate change. More floods, more droughts, more landslides, more extreme levels, and even some that are very interesting. If I look at the water temperature in the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, it is very hot. We should be seeing an uptake in hurricanes because of that, but we're really not because of other changes of this that we see. I can tell you here in Austin, I would love a hurricane to come up our coastline so it can bring significant rain and fill some of our lakes, which are about approaching all-time lows. So you're seeing that. So there's a lot of opportunities. And again, cities are unquestionable engines of economic growth. And in most countries, they account for probably close to 80% of the gross domestic product of the countries. And they provide employment, and also they provide opportunities for poverty, because it's really hard to deal with the homeless and poverty out in the rural environment. And they tend to focus to the cities and the urban centers. So that's part of what you're seeing as you begin to look at how you have the sustainable urbanization challenge coming to play and the different things you can do with it. It is a critical uh, activity. Back in one of the UN meetings that was called Rio 20, you saw some great goals put in place for this. You saw more goals on urban sustainability in most of the COPs that have been held lately by the UN and others. So it's one that is attracting global interest. But again, like many things before, education is lagging behind. And education is a critical part of getting any effort such as this focused, implemented, and gaining considerable traction. So, Dr. Sharif, thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Now I request Professor Dr. Nehreen Mazib. Uh, what's your view about sustainability challenge? Even if you share some of your experience from Bangladesh, I think this will be helpful for our friends from North America.
Yes, thank you very much. At first, take the opportunity to express my. Am I heard clearly? You hear me, right? Okay, thank you. So great, and it's a great pleasure to be here today and talk about such a burning issue, sustainability, my favorite. So to talk about myself first, to introduce me, I am an environmentalist. So I love everything about environment as much as all of us are concerned about it. And I get to think every day, what would we have done without the environmentalists thinking about it? Like, we have wastes to manage, we have water to drink, we wouldn't be able to live without it, and we need clean air to breathe. So there should never be any challenge with security for environmentalists, for jobs. Yes. Now, so David so nicely summarized those points, those which relate with sustainability issues. And talking from developing country perspectives, basically, every time we are faced with this question, what is there to leverage? Because the challenges are many folds. We can't say development, we can't say to the industries, stop growing. We need industries, we need industrialization, we need to sustain the people, the big pool of people, the push and pull factor, like we can't say that urban centers cannot grow, right? So, and with the growth and with the density, we are faced with the mostly with the, of course, apart from the climate change attributes, we are facing to a great degree the environmental degradation that's happening in the form of pollution, right? With the increase of course, jobs, livelihoods, the struggle to have a better life, right? We are all working for the quality of life, like David said. So at the end of the day, what are we faced with? We are faced with an increment of everything every day. The difference between the past and the present is the incremental rate has grown many folds, which we are not being able to deal with. And to talk about the developing country, we have to maintain this stage that it's such a challenge that every day we are walking up the ladder, we are going up 3 steps, coming down 2 steps. So we are actually solving, we are going up, then we are creating more problems than we had before, right? So beforehand, we never had this climate change issues so much. We never had so much of drainage congestion issues. Why are these alarming now that we are being inundated so frequently and also at wrong times of the year, which was never expected? So, which is harming the cropping schedules, the outputs, the production, everything, right? And that's also playing with the whole environmental cycle, basically. And it's definitely disrupting the livelihood, which is also creating a major big demarcation between the quality of life between the poor and the rich. It's actually getting bigger day by day, because the problems that are being faced at different ends of the life are different. So people deal with it in different ways. Like if we talk about the sustainability and the development goals that we actually talk about every day, because we have to meet those SDGs. So which problem should we target at a time? Like we need qualitative, like I said, what can we leverage here? Now, of course, we need increased awareness. That's why we need quality education, right? And then, when people get educated, they really expect to have more things in life, more advantages, right? Then how can you deal with it if you do not, or if you do not care about, or you are not even interested for decentralizing the facilities, right? You have to create or open up the mind to think about your ambience at a whole, that yes, we actually have to sacrifice. That is the main essence of sustainability, right? That we really need to sacrifice some of our facilities, like decentralize, take out the things that we do not need, or we do not need at the heart of the city, because it's not one problem that we are dealing with. We need to eradicate congestion, not only drainage congestion, we need also to deal with traffic congestion, for example, which is also a big issue because everybody wants to be in the urban center. The education and the jobs, all that you aspire for in life, the betterment, right? Everything, your livelihood center is urban, right? And then we are creating more problems in it. So the same problem, we are just moving round and round and round. We are creating, yes, we are going towards development. We are progressing. At the same time, we are also lagging behind. Like millions of people are actually still not having a healthy environment to live in. Because we, the researchers, are bringing up the statistics every day. Like, yes, this much of people are under this risk, risk of hazards, risk of toxicity. Why? Given by us, because we need to produce. We can't stop producing, and we can't stop creating waste. So where do we stop? Yes, we can keep educating people. We should create awareness, but we have to give them also the idea that go people, develop the whole country. Do not create congestion in the urban centers. Actually, that should be the key, I think, for having the sustainability across the national level, across the nation. We should decentralize from urban centers. I think I'd like to hear more from the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Now I request Mr. James Seed.
Thank you, Sharif, for the opportunity to speak, and thank you, David, for setting the table for us so well, as I've come to expect from you. And thank you, Naveen, for that very moving ending, decentralization from the urban centers. We have the capacity to meet the challenges that face us, but do we have the political will? I'm going to come back to this because the centralization has been part of our history. It used to be that go behind the city walls in order to defend yourselves against someone attacking you. And, now it's we're starving. Let's go into the city so we can have food to eat. We don't have any money. Let's go to the city. We can find a job. And so there's this consistent and near constant wave of people coming into the city centers. And are the city centers ready to adapt and meet all of these requirements of all these people? No. So we see them living lives that are desperate. There's pain and suffering in all of our urban centers now. And not only the things that David so eloquently listed, but there's so many mental health challenges that have been they're not new, but they're just more pronounced than ever before. And there's things like in inner cities, there are food deserts where the only thing you can afford to buy is something that isn't nourishing at all. And it's, going to we see this rise in obesity because the only thing it's just empty calories that they're consuming and they have no other option. And this is just because of impoverishment and because they cannot go and get healthy foods for them. And the healthy foods that are shipped in go to more prosperous neighborhoods. There are many, many problems, but there's nothing that we cannot overcome. When we have the science, we have the technology, but do we have the political will? We had a President Trump who took us out of the Paris Accords for once. And we had a senator holding up a snowball in Congress saying there's no such thing as climate change, global warming. These things are becoming less and less. It's becoming clearer and clearer with oh my goodness, the wildfires that David described, in Northern California, who are well aware of this. We woke up to orange skies, the smoke, the inhalation, the breathing was dangerous, toxic. So, and this is, and Trump said, well, it's because it's a democratic state. They don't manage their wildfires, their forests well enough. They should rake the leaves. Come on. So it's Northern California, then it's Canada, it's everywhere. And we have torrential rains now where there were no such things. And we have tremendous flooding, and the homes being destroyed. So these climate changes, these effects of climate changes aren't so easy to deny anymore, but have we the will to change what we're doing, the way we're doing things? Not so clear to me that we have come to the realization that we're all in this together and we must pull our oars in the same direction. We can meet this. This is not something that we cannot fix, but the rate of change is accelerating. It's like a hockey stick. It's been going like this for a while, and now it's taken off. The rate of change is accelerating to the point of when we do come up with a solution, it's almost, too little, too late. And there's a new problem right after our solution solves the old problem. So we have to be nimble, we have to be quick, but we have to be allied together, and we have to be pulling together. We're a global economy now, but we have to think of ourselves as a global community. We all have to take care of each other because we're all in this together. Thank you for a wonderful show, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor Rob. What you want to discuss about sustainability challenge?
Well, as James kind of pointed out, right now what we're doing isn't working. And that's an issue. I was just finishing a report a couple years back. A lot of the companies I work with put in place sustainability managers, and that function has just fallen out of favor. And I think it comes back to the same kind of problem we initially had with risk managers, which means you give somebody the responsibility for something, but you don't give them the authority to execute. And so all they do is become a bucket where you either point to it and say, look, we're doing something, but we're for the most part really not. Or if there's a problem and it reflects poorly on you, oh, look, the sustainability manager isn't doing their job, so let's get a new one. That same thing happened with risk managers. The risk managers could report on risk, but they had no authority to correct risk. And from the banking collapse was to a certain extent connected to this idea of risk managers, because they were decoupled from the process of making good decisions. They just became a blame bucket, which works once, and then you have to question the intelligence of the people that take the job. So the underlying issue is this is everybody's responsibility. The problem we've got, we just certainly saw that in Hawaii, is stuff's happening pretty fast right now, and our ability to now turn the ship and correct what's going on may have passed, at least passed timely. The focus may now need to be in terms of dealing with some of these problems, mitigation as opposed to correction, only because we can mitigate faster. And I should point out, a lot of the problems we've had with trying to address climate change is because politicians tend to want to have a quick fix, and there is no quick fix to this. That you can't just suddenly say, okay, we're going to go to electric cars and presto changeo, all our sustainability issues are over. And even looking at the pivot to electric vehicles, we really didn't think through batteries. I mean, at all. And lithium ion is nasty stuff. I mean, lithium is nasty stuff, and it's hard to repurpose once it's done. It is ugly to mine, and the batteries aren't very good. They're certainly a lot better than lead acid in terms of performance, but perhaps a bit worse in terms of the environment. And clearly, as we've seen, when they catch fire, they really burn. So and I almost lost my house to a lithium-ion fire, and even though I was the lead battery analyst for the U.S. and Europe for a number of years. So even somebody experienced, which I was trained in putting out fires as well, so I saved the house. But in the end, you look at it and say, well, I mean, maybe electric cars were the answer, but electric cars done right. And now, a decade or so, decade and a half, 2 decades into this, we're now talking about solid-state batteries, which was a technology we probably should have had before we tried to pivot to electric cars. And of course, the other issue we've had is we kind of needed to clean up energy production as well, because the peak loads are still handled by oil-fired, natural gas-fired, and coal-fired plants. And so if you're putting more load on the grid, that means you're turning on all these very unhealthy generators to make up for that loading, and that makes no sense as well. Now, I'm not against electric cars. I have a hybrid and I have a full electric, and so I'm pro electric cars. But the thing is, they could be a ton cleaner if they were done right. They still outperform gas cars, but not by as much as you would think. And the latest study I saw is parts of the country, they don't outperform gas cars, at least economically, because the gas there is cheap and the electricity there is high, and so you're kind of in the toilet when it comes to an economic decision on electric cars. On the West and East Coast, there is no argument that electric cars are cheaper, but it depends on kind of where you are, what your energy source is, and the cost of gas. It all has to be kind of factored in economically, even though overall they're still cleaner. So the thing is one, James is right. We all have to take this as a responsibility. Two, we all have to kind of look at what we're doing and then shift our behavior to companies that appear to be acting appropriately, that are doing the right thing, so that they see and continue to see the connection between their sustainability efforts and the bottom line. Now, I will say the companies that I'm working with generally are reporting between $1 billion and $3 billion of extra revenue connected to their sustainability efforts, which is a positive change. The concern, of course, I mentioned, is the loss of the sustainability officer. Because I'm not saying anybody. I mean, it's one thing to get rid of the sustainability officers and then really kind of take the responsibility and make it global. But right now, it looks like the sustainability officer is going away, and sustainability is becoming a lower priority, which is really odd, given the kinds of problems we are currently seeing around the globe. The immigration movement due to climate change is significant, and the violence, as anticipated, has been going up rather dramatically, and we've got large areas now that used to be able to produce food that no longer can, and so it's going to get worse. And so this takes me back to the underlying issue is we really need to shift a lot of resources into mitigation. I mean, there's no reason why, for instance, in terms of fighting fires, we shouldn't be using the same advanced technology that we're using to kill people. I mean, we just lost a couple helicopters and a number of people that collapsed. These helicopters were observing fires, and some were transporting some of the folks in and out. Those can all be done with automated systems now, and particularly with regard to observation, there's really no reason not to use drones as opposed to helicopters to fly over fires. It just makes no sense. We'll just take the human element out of it, and if the drone goes down, at least nobody died. With regard to putting out fires, using repurposed airliners isn't exactly an ideal solution. We wouldn't do that if we were in war. We wouldn't suddenly say, okay, it might be if we were thrown into it, we didn't have resources, but if we had a lot of time to plan, we'd build bombers. Specifically designed to carry the ordnance and deliver it precisely. Well, you can build water bombers. I mean, the thing is we have the technology. We could do a better job, and we can do heavy lift. I mean, we've been talking around heavy lift for a long time, and heavy lift would seem to be ideal. You might be able to take most of a lake up in a heavy lift, depending on how big it was, and then on an acre fire, you might, with a single flight or a couple flights, be able to put it out, and then maybe not get to the kinds of problems we're having here in the Pacific Northwest. We're talking about fires covering 30, 40, 50,000 acres, and once it gets that big, it gets really hard to put out because the amount of labor and resources you have to resource to put the fire out exceeds what any state and probably what many countries could put forward. And certainly in Hawaii, what we saw almost immediately was absolutely no capability to put out large fires. And the fires now pretty much wiped out Maui. And two other islands are now look to be in a similar shape. And you look at the government, well, okay, I got it. You haven't really had fires before, so maybe you weren't really prepared for it. But go back to the fact that really nobody is. I mean, Europe's in flames, and yet still no high profile effort to create anti-fire equipment that could deal with stuff at this scale. It's almost like we're pretending it's going to go away magically, and it's not. It's going to get worse. And so the fact that we seem to, as a world, be speaking about sustainability a great deal, but not really taking it anywhere near as seriously as for instance, we're taking the Ukraine-Russia conflict. That we're taking seriously. We're ramping weapon systems. We're back to producing. We're in a wartime scenario. But if you look at the different, and by the way, I'm not against doing the Ukraine thing. All I'm saying is if we took the same effort that we're taking to fight the Russians, to fight climate change, at least fight the effects of climate change, we could save a ton of lives. Now, putting resources into reinforcing the dikes, putting better sensors in place so we can see dike failures before they happen and can reinforce. Because once a dike goes out, then the damage gets to billions of dollars overnight. Identifying and repairing the dikes is millions of dollars in terms of cost. Mitigating the damage is billions. In Florida, insurance providers have pulled out of the state as just uneconomic. Well, there's a statement on leadership in Florida that's not particularly positive. You're running basically a small country, a state, and your people can't even get insurance for the kinds of disasters they're going to get hit with. Now, I can understand the insurance companies, because when insurance companies go in, They bet the disaster is not going to occur. You bet the disaster is going to occur, and you hope the insurance company is right. Well, if it's pretty clear the disaster is going to occur, the insurance company doesn't want to play, because it's like, are you going to bet when you know you're going to lose? And let's not talk about large scale raffles, because that goes against my point. But the thing is generally there's to bet on something, you at least have a chance you're going to win. And if the state is so exposed that you're going to lose every time, you're not going to put money there. And that's exactly what's happening in Florida. And how can you argue against climate change when you see these underlying elements? I mean, to my knowledge, Hawaii has never burned to the ground like this before. To my knowledge, you've never had insurance companies pull out of a state in mass. Well, we did actually in California, for a different reason. The insurance company pulled out of the state of California because of the housing collapse. Insurance companies didn't want to get involved because the chance that they were going to have to rebuild a bunch of houses that weren't going to be worth it. They're going to lose their shirts. Different issue, but this is the first time we had them pull out because of climate change, to my knowledge. So in the end, we're seeing all the elements that indicate we're in significant trouble, and yet we're not raising up the kind of resources we need to keep the people alive, healthy, and productive. And if the people aren't kept alive, healthy, and productive, well, we're going to have real problems going forward trying to sustain the population. And so in the end, I think I'm arguing that I think our priorities are mucked up, and that we really need to step back for a moment, and not just because I think a lot of the problem is we're all sitting back and saying, well, somebody else is going to handle it, or science is going to magically come through and it's going to fix the problem. Don't get me wrong, science could magically come through and kind of fix the problem, but it's the old argument is you prepare for the worst and you hope for the best. You don't prepare for the best and hope for the worst, and yet it's that latter path we seem to be on. And so fixing the mindset so that we prioritize all risks. Risk of war, fine, but risk of climate change should be right up there next to it, if not above, because the likelihood right now of being hit by a disaster is much greater than the likelihood that a foreign country is going to bomb you. It's still enough likelihood to address, but in terms of watching the events occurring around the world, we're much more likely to be hurt by a climate event than we're likely to be killed in a war. And so it suggests that maybe our priorities should shift a little bit. A lot of the money we're putting into defense, at least some of that money should be shifted over to address and protect citizens against climate change. And so in the end, it's just, I think part of what we need to do is, one, establish the fact that this is something we all need to be engaged with, and we can't really expect other people to step in and cover our asses. And number two, we need to readjust our priorities. And so the things that are putting us the most at risk are the things that are best addressed, and we're not there yet. And I'll pass the hat. And Sharif must have. There he is.
There you go.
Thank you. Professor Dr. Nehrin, if you have any analysis.
Yes, sure. Actually,
Yes,
thank you
Professor
so
Dr.
much.
Nehrin, yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, James. The challenges that you put so beautifully with the with the political will issue. Yes, that's totally taken, and it's a very valid thing to talk about. And the challenges that you mentioned, all tangled together, makes all our solution path so tricky that we keep swirling around and then come back to the same path. Okay, then we say, okay, no solution possible. Maybe we can live peacefully by staying quiet and do nothing. And Rob essentially stated, which I was going to start with, priority. So what actually makes us prioritize, right? So with increased ability, capacity, and education, what are we expected to do? What is the expected behavior from us? That's actually another sustainability issue and another SDG challenge that we seldom fail to establish through our behavior or lifestyle. It's the responsible consumption. So we actually consume everything. Everything is for consumption, and what basically drives us towards that, it's our mindset, right? So where we should think about, where should we put our stress on? Yes, I am an engineer by profession. However, seldom we fail to realize that we need to work on the behavioral aspects more, the social impacts more. Like, I can easily talk about for hours and hours about why the green agencies are not, making their names on the board so frequently. They why, of course they get incentives. However, the cost benefit, if we look at the economic part of it, like we keep finding all the industries for keeping their discharge continuous, making emissions, although frequently we know that okay, this is actually adding towards the greenhouses and whatnot. We are still developing. However, what is the incentive for them you know to be within the limit? We pose limits, they give fines, and they keep polluting because it's the attitude, and it's compromised with their business decision, like you said, that we need to work on this ethical part, which actually obligates us to save the environment, right? I mean, uh, we have a big system problem because our, like Rob specified, that uh, whatever we do, however we design our systems, however we plan to produce whatever we produce, how many times do we actually think that is it actually going to sustain in the context of what we will leave behind? No, because it's never for 10, 15, or 20 or 50 years down the line. It's just for 1 year, maybe 2 years or 3 years. So sustainability is never our priority, right? Yes, prioritizing is a very important aspect. We talk about recycling, right? That is a very, very significant aspect towards reaching sustainability, right? But I should say, from developing country perspective, the more we are going towards westernization, we are more becoming wasteful. I'm sorry, with due respect. I mean, from the pristine kind of behavior, or for the love of nature and organic things, we are moving more towards convenience because we love to be convenient. And that comes from attitude, right? So we are making technology, and why shouldn't we be comfortable? Because how many years I'm going to live? Okay, maybe after COVID, everybody, including me, likes to talk about, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive for another year. So, okay, who gives a shit about climate change? Who actually cares? Who cares about how the environment will be when I'm gone? So basically, this mindset and attitude towards the love for this earth, where we really are obligated, makes a big change. And that's where we have to work, right? Rather than stressing ourselves with making these numbers up. But yes, everything has to be concerted, like both of you stressed on. Like on one end, we have to look at the capacity that each of the stakeholders can reach. Like we cannot expect from a developing country that they would, like Rob said, they will go for electric cars in one day, or switch towards or energy intensive processes which are really not sustainable going to be. So they need to work on more, green recycling and less impact. The impact analysis trends show that these are possible, that reducing the consumption, recycling impact, the recycling the things, even the wastes, can reduce the consumption, reduce the costs, and then the raw materials, everything actually can work towards making a sustainable impact for both the industries and also for the environment. So these kinds of strategies actually should come from a global scale, that which countries should focus more on, I mean, each country or each nation has their strength based on what is good for their climate, what comes better in their climatic perspective. So we shouldn't burden those parts of the world who actually are not strong in those aspects, right? So we basically expect more from the Western countries from the consumption aspect of the part. Because I have been there. I have spent a couple of years for my higher studies actually in North America. And that's what I felt. Like, so few people actually know, even are aware about the impact or the footprint that we are creating on Earth. You know, practically people are ignorant about this fact when they do not have to worry about these things. That, well, okay, everything is fine, nothing is happening, I'm good, I'm happy, I have my coat, I have my boot, I have my jacket, I can deal with the cold, and I am not drowning. I have food, I have my shelter, whatnot. However, when I'm back to my scenario, then we are dealing with real life problems, right? The numbers here are 10 times less, but we are facing 100 times more. So here again, mindset, attitude, nothing actually changes. However, people who really work for survival, you know, they are desperate. They are the fighters, which I can say for sure. I am not one of them. Maybe I'm the privileged one. I can say that. But however, we still have a lot to do. Thank you, Dr. Sharif, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Jamesy, what you want to share after this
Well, I'm really
interesting
humbled listening to this.
discussion with Dr.
That was wonderful. Rob, you were spectacular. So I'm really struggling to add to the conversation. And the thing that I would like to emphasize, I think, is that, the industry and the environment it's not a zero-sum game. We used to have industries that poured their waste into rivers, and the flora and fauna downstream would suffer. And we ended up saying, hey, we can't do this. We poured waste into our rivers until they actually burned. They set fire. Water doesn't burn. So we learned that we could not keep doing this. And we changed. And industry still thrived. So being conscious of what we can and cannot do to the environment is a plus. It's not something that costs industry. Yet we run up against this attitude, especially in the capitalist environment. We run up into this, making money is the priority. And if anything will cost me money, it's not worth doing. And we have to overcome this. We have to build in a sensitivity to that we cannot continue to pollute our air, pollute our water, because when water becomes scarce, water is life. So then it becomes, who gets to pay for it? Come on, we have to be smarter than this. We have to be a little more compassionate than this. And compassion is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of caring about your fellow earthlings, humankind, taking care of and being stewards of the planet. This is our job. This is not something that we can turn our backs on, but we do. So what we have to do is call each other out and say, hey, come on, do your part. And the more people speak up and you change the people in your sphere of influence, and they change the people in their spheres of influence, and that's how it grows and becomes a mass movement. And now our education level has changed. We're more aware of the environmental costs than we ever were before. I know in the 70s, I took a course on environmental economics, and it was the first one my university offered on the subject. So, it was in the 60s, we didn't think about this. In the 70s, we started to. And it's getting more and more consciousness across more and more people. But we still have a lot of work to do. And David opened up with talking about planting trees on the new homes. Well, we were in major cities where there was always an Elm Street without elms. It was a different reason, but people are going to experience the loss of nature. Nature that we took for granted growing up is not going to be available. Forests are going to burn. They don't grow back overnight. These things that Maui was such a wonderful island to visit. Well, it must be so tragic to look at it now. This loss, maybe it's preventable. Maybe not. Maybe it was fated to be, but maybe not. Maybe there's a way to think about these things in advance and take precautions. You don't have to stick your finger in the dike. You can do other things to make sure that they don't break, as Rob so eloquently pointed out. And I wanted to say, in the insurance issue in Florida, it's also true in California too, and also for the reasons Rob said, but also because of the advanced age of my mother-in-law, we're buying a second home in Sonoma, which is in Northern California, and there's no fire insurance available, because we've had fires, and they're not going to take the risk. Why would they insure us? We can't pay them enough. So we're still struggling to find this to be able to cover our second home, for fires. That wasn't something we worried about 20 years ago. It's something we have to worry about now. And there are many things like this that we need to pay attention to. But the main thing is to remember that we're all in it together. This is, you could be rich and you can run away. When the London fog got so sick you couldn't breathe it, the rich moved away. Well, we're going to run out of places to move to. We're going to run out of places to run away to. We're going to face the consequences no matter how much money you have. The time for change is now. This isn't something we can postpone. Action is required, and everybody has got to pitch in. Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you, Professor Rob.
So I think there are three changes that could be made that would significantly improve our situation. First is we've got to fix the fact that companies don't operate strategically. They operate tactically. The best way to at least initially start that is get hedge fund managers off boards. The issue is, as soon as we started putting hedge fund managers on boards, it forced CEOs to think within a quarter and do incredibly stupid things long term. Give you an example: Zoom. Zoom is a champion of work at home. They spiked during the pandemic, and they just recently ordered half of their employees to come back to work because they're saying work at home doesn't work. Now think about this: you make a product that enables a particular way of working, your revenue is connected to that behavior, and you announce as a leader in the field that that behavior is nonsensical and should be discontinued. They're going to save some money and maybe have some more employees at work. They're going to get a hell of a lot less money for product. It's tactically, it makes sense. They're going to get a spike for some of the savings. They're going to spend not much when you take people back to the office, but they get some benefit. But strategically, they're going to take a hell of a loss long term. That's because he's thinking tactically. He's fixing one problem. Managers can't figure out how to manage remote employees, and instead of fixing that problem, he's just going to bring people back into the office, even though fixing that problem is critical to his company's future. Just something he didn't want to do. Number two, we really have to start charging companies for the pollution that they create. Right now, it is cheaper to pollute than it is to not pollute. That makes no sense. No sense whatsoever. The state and the citizens effectively are paying the freight for the pollution that's benefiting the company. Look at the petrochemical industry in particular. And hell, here we give them subsidies. We actually pay them to pollute, which means even though we're giving them billions in subsidies, we're giving them even more billions we're not recording in terms of the damage they're doing to the individual environment. If we stop the subsidies and flipped and start charging for the damage, they'd probably go under. I mean, and presto, changeo, problem solved. So that would be problematic, and I'm not suggesting we try to do that because we'd have serious governmental problems in making that happen. But you can certainly phase it in gradually. And you can see places like Saudi Arabia and Dubai are anticipating the loss of petrochemical capability, and they're trying to pivot their countries to other areas. Now, I'm not saying I'm fond of either governments, but in terms of thinking strategically for their citizens, at least in regard to this one thing, yeah, they're kind of doing that. I might argue they might need to move faster, but at least they're moving, and against a bunch of other countries that aren't moving at all, at least they're more performant. And number three, we really need to start thinking about how we should change our lives to mitigate the underlying problems. James Eads talked about the fact you can't get insurance in parts of California because of fire. And I recall a few years back talking to a guy that had a similar problem. And what he did is he built a fireproof house. And he put in a pool not so much for recreational purposes, because he needed a water source in case they lost water during a fire. They cleared around the home, so they had a lot of clear area. The house was built out of steel and cement with some stucco. Very little burnable in the home. Triple pane glass. Sprinklers on the house itself to keep the house, because fires can transition through non-burnable material through heat transfer. So you've got to keep the structure cool, and that's what the sprinklers are for. And the pool then would supply the water to keep the home cool. And in theory, unless you're talking about some type of thermonuclear fire, which nothing can survive, that house would survive any conceivable forest fire that might occur around it. Now, trees and stuff might burn. Landscape certainly going to have issues, but the house itself would remain standing, and to my knowledge, it's still standing today. And through a lot of fires. So instead of spending the money, and think about this for a bit, for certain kinds of insurance, like certain kinds of fire insurance, it might actually be cheaper long term, instead of paying for the fire insurance to replace the house, to structure the house so it wouldn't burn in the first place. Because regardless how you do it, the fire insurance isn't going to pay to replace the entire house. It tends to pay short. It won't pay to replace all your belongings. It tends to pay short. You're still going to have to rebuild the damn thing. That means you have to live someplace else while it's being rebuilt. If you could prevent the house from going up in the first place, wouldn't that be a better path? I mean, then you've got all your stuff. You don't have to move out. Yeah, you might have to stay in the house and stay in place during a fire. But if you've handled the water issue, if you've thought through what you're going to need to be there, and if you built a structure that will survive the event, then you're pretty good. A lot of people get killed trying to evacuate from a fire, and if you could just shelter in place, it would be better. I mean, remember back watching for the first time watching Wizard of Oz and watching people run into the hurricane shelter, and go, well, why? And really, I looked at my house in California and said, crap, they actually built our house with a hurricane. Even though there'd never been a hurricane, our house had one of those. And my grandfather, when he built his house in Northern California, he built an underground safe room, not for burglars, but in case of an event that might require, because the door itself wasn't that secure. But the room itself, if the house could have gone up, you could have survived in the room. And in that room were foodstuffs, water, all the stuff you need to live if the house went up, and you had to find a safe place to be when the house was on fire, as opposed to trying to run out of the house. So in the end, we can build, like, because you go to Israel and they have safe, because they're experiencing missile and rocket events. Almost every apartment and house has a structured safe room. So if something happens, you run into that safe room and you're relatively safe and you'll survive it. And so they changed the building code. They made people build these safe rooms, and as a result, lives are being saved. And we could do the same thing in California with earthquakes. After the big one in California, they changed building codes, and now when you build a home in California, the home is supposed to stand up to a Category 7. I believe it's still Category 7. I don't think you've moved to anything higher, but it's supposed to hold up to a Category 7. Well, now when we have earthquakes, we don't have the level of deaths and destruction that we once had. I mean, some of the houses that go back to the 20s are still having issues. I mean, you've got some of the bigger buildings that are built out of bricks that still have some issues, but for the most part, the structures are standing. I should point out, though, when we had that big earthquake in the 1990s, a number of freeways didn't quite make the cut. But we learned from it. The code was changed, and the new structures are much better reinforced. And so, taking that into account into how we're building stuff, how we're creating things, and maybe even rethinking our ecologies as a concept. This idea of building a structure that can be self-sustainable, live, work, everything in an enclosed system. And it should be easier to manage waste in a closed system because you control most of all the elements. But in case of a major event like a fire, earthquake, assuming it's built right, your citizens, where they work, where they eat, those are all safe. And so you might have to deal with some of the outlying areas, but your core population is maintained safe and secure. It seems to me with those three things, we could do an awful lot to preserving, and that's really the underlying goal here, is preserving the race. I mean, that we talk about climate change and we talk about reporting fires, but really the goal is let's keep people alive. So that people are alive, regardless of what happens, we have the chance to fix it. If people are dead, you don't really come back from dead. So it's not like you wipe out a population and somebody's going to figure out how to fix a whatever it is that caused the death. You got to keep your population alive, and we're just not doing it. I mean, we're really not prioritizing that. So those three things. Get hedge fund managers off of boards and get companies to think strategically again. Charge for the pollution that companies are creating, and then build and structure for the kinds of weather events that we know are coming. So you keep the population safe. So at least when something happens, you're not losing most of your people in the process, and you have an inability to rebuild or maybe even sustain a civilization. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining today's sessions. Urban sustainability is a major interesting aspects for emerging economy. World Talent Economy Forums, we are working with B-Lab, Japan, to solving these complex issues. And those who want to collaborate, they can collaborate with us. And I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academia. Thank you, Professor, for joining today's session. Thank you, Mr. James Eid, and thank you, Mr. Rob, for joining today. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.